Now, right now we'll have a very interesting dialogue, a dialogue which is going to look at how can we push innovation. Innovation is something, some of you may know, Bangladesh Brand Forum when we are celebrating 10 years, we have been trying to push the next 10 years, and we are trying to sort of set our goal for the next 10 years. And in that 10 years journey, we realize pushing the core thought of innovation is going to be the center of everything. In fact, without innovation, it's going to be very, very difficult for Bangladesh to move to the next level, to realize the potential that the country has. And so we have launched a new platform called Bangladesh Innovation Conclave. And that is right now working with multiple groups, both within the industry, university, and government institutions, to create 8 innovation hubs across 8 divisional cities, which is going to push the new thoughts, new thinking, the digital skill set, and how can we create new ideas and help push the economic and social development. And we realize that the dialogue of innovation is something which is relevant for every one of us, but also broadly as a society, because we cannot start creating the innovation mindset at a later stage. It needs to start from a very early stage. So it's the society collectively needs to push these skill set. So we have got 2 esteemed experts with us. So I'll be inviting my professor. So you know, all of you know him, Professor Syed Farhat Anwar, who is the Chief Advisor of Bangladesh Brand Forum and also Professor IBA. So he's going to moderate the discussion. And along with him, we'll have Professor Dr. Jonathan A.J. Wilson, who has given a tremendous and very insightful keynote in the morning. And also, we are extremely really glad to have KV Sridhar, who is known as Pops, founder and Chief Creative Officer of Hyper Collective, who is also the ex-Chief Creative Officer of Sapien Nitro and Leo Barnard. So can I invite the 3 esteemed experts on stage to have a dialogue on innovation and how do we push innovation in Bangladesh?
Good afternoon. Right after lunch, it's fairly difficult to keep people awake, but let's see whether we can do a good job of it or not. We'll wait for Jonathan as he comes, but since we are already a bit late, I guess that we can start a sort of a dialogue with you, Pops, particularly with regard to innovation, which is not only a difficult area to discuss, but apparently seems that we were also hearing during the morning session that creativity is something which is not taking place. We are becoming more of a follower, even considering that the magic of the digital world is going to solve all our problem in terms of innovation. So these are certain issues that were coming in. Now, automatically, the first question that comes to my mind is, without innovation, we cannot go forward. There is absolutely no doubt about it. But at the same time, we also don't want to take any chances. And therefore, we want to maintain this particular status quo. How can we make people motivated to come out of this status quo and think more in terms of innovation?
I think there are 3 kinds of innovations. One is innovation which we do in the labs. So that is one kind of innovation which you may find useful in the market or you may not. History has many of them. The second kind of innovation is sitting in a lab and then thinking what people might need and then innovate. The third is innovation which comes from a need from the people. I think when innovation is purposeful, it solves a problem. And that innovation comes from any individual. Every human being is capable of thinking and creating ideas. Only thing which we can do is to provide an atmosphere for them to really thrive on that. There were times when, even in India also, people used to wait for something to happen, somebody to give you a job. Somebody has to actually solve your problems. Now, last decade and a half, India is finding solutions within their own lives. So people are finding solutions. For instance, the branded multinational sanitary napkins are too expensive for Indians, women to really adopt it and then use it. So female hygiene, it's irrespective of whatever growth India has been having, female hygiene has never been looked at because nobody could produce something which is affordable to people. Then came an innovation from a man in Coimbatore, and then he created a small scale industry which can be replicated in every village, which are biodegradable. He is not an educated person. Soon a feature film inspired by this is going to come out with Akshay Kumar. So that, when you actually see a purpose, when you see a need, and then you try to do something, then innovation will happen. The second important thing is skilling India. Once you skill people, they will find a way to express. They will actually experiment and then try and then see where their calling is. What is that which they can? You can't make people solve somebody else's problem. You need to solve the problem which you are facing. So that, whether you are an artisan living in Tanjavur, in small part of Tamil Nadu, suddenly, if the skill sets are there, the second generation is taking the same artistic values and then putting them on internet and then selling them on Google or any of the e-commerce sites. Suddenly that changed the entire tribe of artisans who were living in Tanjavur, that entire city. So from where the skill sets will come, one is the government is actually training people, and even private sector, everyone is coming forward to train people because they need them. Second thing, what is also happening is the migration of young people from smaller villages to bigger cities is happening. It happened some time back. Now the reverse migration is happening, and then these people are learning the skill sets, living in a city powered by a mobile phone, and then they find their own calling, and then they understand how to actually maximize the capabilities which they have. Unlike the older generation, they stuck around in the cities. These kids are going back to their villages and then making the transformation happen. I think the reverse transformation, the life teaches them the skills which they are taking and then going back to transform their own villages. Second, a large scale effort by the government to skill people so that they can innovate on their own. It need not be innovation, doesn't mean that it has to come from a billion-dollar company. Innovation can come from our own needs, smaller innovations, which will actually better people's life.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Jonathan. And well, Bangladesh is unique in one way. Number one is that our density of population. And the other is that if you really talk in terms of pure rural is gradually, well, it's not going to be there in another 5-6 years' time. You will hardly find any pure rural area. We are semi-urban. On top of that, being highly religious, it's very difficult for us to come up and tell, say for example, people up in these semi-urban areas to come out of their sort of normal norms and move into something that is more innovative, both in terms of education and also changing their mindset. So now, can we actually inculcate this innovation through education to them? Is that a possibility? And also bearing in mind that they're highly conservative. Can we actually come up and tell them that you come out and be more innovative, and at the end of the day, it will help you in also earnings. So can we actually do that? How do we do it?
I was hoping you were going to talk for longer because, as you saw, I came in late and I've got a sweet in my mouth. Hang on, excuse me. I was trying to finish it. Okay. I think the important thing to consider with innovation is not everybody has to be innovative. But we have to find those people who... Just water dropped from the ceiling there. There was a drop of enlightenment and inspiration there. Just think if we were Zen Buddhists, that would mean something. Right, so I think we need to get these people who would be great innovators. Now, I did some work about 10 years ago with the Engineering and Technology Board, and one of the problems that they identified in the UK was that there were enough engineers and there were enough people in science and all of these careers, but there weren't enough of a certain type of person. So as they saw it, the most creative minds or the most brilliant minds would choose other careers because they found them, there was more kudos, or they paid more money, or they were more sexy, or there could be any number of reasons why. And so the problem of innovation was that the innovation existed, but not the type of innovation that's going to fundamentally change things in a completely different way. So for example, you know, if somebody is super bright and there are a selection of careers, how do you get those super bright people that would ordinarily want to become, for example, medical doctors or engineers and get them into the creative industry or into any other industry, areas that could have a greater good, especially when they're underrepresented or even that career hasn't been created yet. That becomes a challenge because you're trying to get smart people and you're trying to sell them an ideal, and then you've got to support and nurture them in such a way that you then have success stories. So the nearest thing that I can maybe liken it to is, okay, if we were talking about sport and we decided that Bangladesh has to win 10 Olympic gold medals, what would we do? We would focus on the sports in which we think we've got the best chance of getting 10 gold medals, right? So there are certain sports that you might say, look, 100 meters, I don't think it's going to happen unless there is someone that you know in some village somewhere that's super fast. Let's put that one to one side. So you would have a kind of competence analysis where you would decide where could you get the easiest victory. And when you focus on that area, you invest time and resources and you nurture people. And then when there is a success story, you have to evangelize about it all over the place. Because if you got those, even one gold medal, then that could really change and inspire other people. Then the next line of innovation becomes a lot easier. So I think that we need to be clever about where we innovate. Pick the areas, pick the battlegrounds, and then you need to carefully select and encourage some key people and support them. And then the final stage is we need to evangelize about that.
One other thing before I move into
Oh, sorry, there's one. So I know I talk too much, but there was one other thing that I was going to say. I don't necessarily think that conservatism is in opposition to innovation. Some great innovative ideas have come out of very conservative societies because innovation is still about solving problems. And so this idea that you have to be bohemian or liberal or not have many morals or rules or anything and break lots of rules in order to be innovative, I think is not necessarily correct. Actually, you can find very pious, disciplined, intelligent people that are able to innovate. So I would maybe question that idea of conservatism versus innovation.
Thank you. I think this is very important that we understand that. The other point is, well, I'm a professor, you are one as well, and it apparently seems that there is something wrong with the teaching as well. How can we make these teachers promote innovation rather than make students run after grades?
There's nothing wrong with my teaching.
No, I'm trying to find out what can be done.
You know, I get in trouble with a lot of deans of business schools. I think I can say that. Currently I'm okay because I've just started 2 new jobs and both of those deans are women. And So I'm really happy. But previously, I tended to encounter a problem with these old white men who didn't quite understand what I was trying to do or what I said, or the 100+ nationalities that I teach every day in the classroom. So I think that sometimes we're handcuffed by an education system where we're selling something which is maybe not correct. You know, from my perspective, I'm investing in minds for the future. I want to die happy. I want to die, and I want people to pray for me when I'm dead. Right? That's my legacy. My legacy is not, you know, if you want to learn how to pass this exam, you can pass that exam. But actually, you know, one of my key objectives is that people, that the things that I taught them are still relevant in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. And hopefully, if they remember my hair and my beard and my voice, maybe they might give me a job in about 10 years' time when they're in charge of some very influential companies. So I think one of the challenges of education is that we fall for the trap, which is that we look at students like consumers, and they come with money, and therefore we give them these lovely apartments with Wi-Fi, and we give them information that we know that will allow them to pass exams, but it doesn't necessarily get you a job. It doesn't necessarily get you to the top to become CEO. It doesn't necessarily make you a leader. I think those things are neglected, because actually those ones are far more difficult, because for many people, if you sold education like that, they could come to university and it wouldn't be very comfortable for them. Or some people might not succeed under those objectives, but it's a lot easier to say, learn those facts. Learn, like, and in marketing, for example, I mean, I was discussing this morning the difference between, say, marketing that I've seen in Indian universities compared to British ones. In India, they love numbers. They love quantitative data, statistical analysis, and that makes people feel good and safe, because they can get numbers, they can calculate, they can use Greek symbols, and they can therefore demonstrate marketing know-how. The more difficult thing is looking at some of these other more complicated issues to do with creativity, to do with the intersection between, I call it the art in science and the science in arts, because those require cross-disciplinary skills, and also those require exposure to lots of different environments. And so I think the biggest problem that universities have, and the biggest dirty secret, is that there are many academics, if we look in our field of marketing, advertising and branding, that have zero work experience. They've never booked an advertising campaign in their life. They've never touched advertising. They don't know what marketing is. They've never spent their own money on marketing. And yet, you are sending people to these universities to get qualifications. I can say that I've spent £2 million on an advertising campaign, but I know that from experience, I'm one of a few people. The challenge is that universities don't have those academics. They favor people with PhDs, with publications that, if I'm to be honest, a lot of people don't read because they're irrelevant, or they're behind paywalls and it's not worth your money to buy them. And universities prop that up, because why would someone else change the status quo if they've spent years under that oppressive regime of having to do those papers and that PhD in order to get promoted? Yeah. So my problem is that I'm in a system where there is a drift between academia and there's practice. Practitioners don't want to come into university because they get frustrated, in the sense that they think, well, I can't talk about the real things that are happening, or at the speed and change at which they're happening, because the university system designs a curriculum that's supposed to last for 3 years, and in 3 years' time, you know, certain apps and metrics aren't being used in advertising agencies. So I think that we as academics need to think very carefully about what we're actually selling to our students, and to be honest about it. And that requires senior management to kind of think about things in a different way. So it's probably not our fault, right? We're doing our best, but it's the bad guys over there, you know. Yeah, people like Trump University and stuff like that.
Well, in that case, the other thing actually which comes in, and I'll go to Pops now, that we were hearing this morning, that our younger generation, they don't know how to question, they're not very creative, blah, blah, blah. So is the problem with these younger generation or the bosses like you?
No. I think that the problem is, if you see any nation, perhaps, you know, India is touted as one of the youngest nations in the world, where average age of more than 60% of the population is below 26. But if you are a majority of 26-olds, if you are ruling, and then if you are guiding them, who are guiding them? Who are ruling them? all 75-year-olds. So there is a huge gap between the perception. We think that young people are not responsible. We think that young people are not creative because you don't understand what creativity to them means. So there is a huge gap. There is a huge gap between the people who teach, the people who govern, the people who mold them, the people who try to inspire them, between actually the kids are. They're far more knowledgeable today, they're far more exposed today, and then they're far more motivated, and then they have no fear of failure. They are saying, I mean, if you even see India, when I was young, my entire generation was told that come first in the class, be competitive, run like a sperm, go and then hit the target. But that has gone. People are saying take your time, discover, explore, find where your love is, and then do that. And that is where they will become successful. In fact, the elders are actually not leaving them. You are hanging on to them, not really letting them do what they can do. I think that's the biggest thing, even for advertising agencies today. If you were to see, the innovators are innovating. The consumers, the people are adopting them much quicker. The marketing guys then are scratching their head and saying that, okay, this is what people are doing. This is a new technology which has come up. This is how they are using it. They are using WhatsApp. Now, what should we do? Then advertising agencies are trying to learn the gap between an innovation adopted by a common person versus what advertising agencies are learning about it is almost 5 to 6 years. By the time you write a paper and then publish it, world has changed.
Yeah.
I think there are two things which are important while I talk about a lot of change, but at the same time there are a lot of things which have not changed. So somewhere the balance between what has not changed and what has changed is where the success of the next generation is. Of course, they're far more creative, they learn much quicker. I take 3 days to learn anything. They take 30 seconds to learn the new PlayStation game. True?
No, they just invented it. It's on a very serious note. So it apparently seems that we need to develop skill sets, both for the teachers or the bosses, and skill sets for the younger generation. Now my question is, are these skill sets the same or different?
They will obviously be different. I think the learning has become completely opposite to what it used to be. Parents used to teach children, now children teach parents because they adopt to things much quicker than parents can ever. So the reverse thing which is happening, and if you go by the same logic, if you have two young kids, they can operate anything. To them, if you go and then say that digital, they don't even know what digital means because they're living in that era. And if that is so, why it should be different at workplace? Why we are not open to learning from them? Because they adapt much quicker, and then they teach you. And then we always want to teach them, never want to learn from them. I mean, that is where the gap actually happens.
Jonathan, if we were to identify, say, 3 skill sets required for for a person who you're planning to become a creator or creative person, what these 3 skill sets would be?
In 3 words: communication, arts, and science. I actually think that you can have a traditional education. If I look at my own education, my first degree was chemistry and life sciences, and my PhD, I was in branding, but there were no numbers to speak of. I actually looked at Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and Imam Ghazali, and I purposefully wanted to get an arts-based perspective because I already had a science degree. So I think that in the modern age, you have to understand science really well. You have to understand not necessarily how to do big data analytics, but actually what it means and what it can do. The arts, because we need to be connected to our surroundings, our history, and the kind of the human elements. And communication, because I think that we have to learn how to communicate in a variety of formats equally as well. That means, from what I can see, the individuals who have very good spoken oratory skills, presentation skills, can talk well with their thumbs in 140 characters, can write an article, can write a long report. If you can do all of those things, then you understand the art of communication. And those things, I think, cannot be replaced by robots, right? So that's the other side of things. You have to understand arts and sciences, because a lot of things are going to be automated within our lifetime. A lot of our jobs are going to disappear, but I don't think robots or AI or machine learning is going to be able to replace the art of intuitive, dynamic communication. So when it comes to education, I actually think you can teach the same things to different generations, but the mode by which they absorb them and interpret them could be slightly different. So, for example, for my students, there is no point in me telling them not to use their mobile phones, because that's what they want to do. So all that I can do is I can encourage them to use their mobile phones even more. In fact, let's do an experiment to see how young you are. Okay, so if I get my mobile phone out, I notice that not that many people have been tweeting so far, right? I'm going to do a kind of behavioral experiment. I'm going to put my phone on video in a minute, and I'm going to video everybody. Now, the job of everybody in this room is to try their hardest to be the most noticeable in this video, because that's essentially what we're doing in advertising, right? So when I video, you've got to try as hard as you can to steal this camera shot, right? Meaning, I don't know if you want to jump up and down, pretend you're a fidget spinner, scream, you know, shout, but I'm going to do this and I'm going to put this on Twitter. So if we don't do it well, then we look kind of boring to the rest of the world, right? So let's see if it works. Let's see. Are you brave enough? Okay. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to go across and I'm going to go back. So who's going to steal this camera shot? I'm going to start videoing. 3, 2, 1, go. That's lame. Try harder. Even better. So why didn't anyone just jump up and go, "Wah!" or like run around or something? This was an easy crowd to steal. You could have been like the person that stole the crowd. To me, this is a prime example of like, this is a marketplace. You're all competitors. You have the opportunity to steal this marketplace and to take the limelight, and you dropped the ball. You weren't brave enough. Let's do it one more time. I'm trying to wind you up. Let's get more noisy and aggressive about this. Okay, I'm going to press record now. Bless you.
That was better.
Okay, so what did we learn? Second time round, we were much better. So imagine that I kept doing this. You would become super great at it after about the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th attempt. So one of the things that I do in my classes is each week I try to get them to replicate something that takes them out of their comfort zone and gets them a bit silly and gets them to try new things. And then we do it again and again and again, so that you develop some sort of kind of muscle memory, so that actually then you can just perform on demand, because that's really important. You don't get good at kind of innovation if you don't practice. You don't get good at pitching for business if you don't actually do it actively lots of times. So I think that's another important element. Do we do enough in our education where we teach, we test, we teach again, we test, and we do it iteratively so we can see if there's an improvement? Often we teach something, we examine it. My Bangla is not very good, but it was in like Hindi or Urdu, it's chilegi, right? It'll do, that's it. Chulbe, okay, chulbe. So then, that's it. Okay, we can move on to the next thing. And sometimes that's a mistake. I think that we should focus on things and repeat doing them again and again and again, because then you get really good.
Well, the other thing that came up was, thank you so much, Jonathan, which was in the previous presentation that we were having, that we were looking at some successful communications. And I found that most of these communications became viral because of one other reason, which was it was trying to hit at more human value systems. How are these human value systems important to look at innovations? You were talking about needs and wants a couple of minutes ago. So could you elaborate on that, that how can we actually link with the society and make people more innovative?
See, I think, when you connect with other human being, they respond much better to you. So in communication, connection is far more important. Building a relationship is more important. That's the reason why people fall in love in a train journey than an air journey, right? Because you spend a lot more time together and then you build a relationship. And your conversation will keep on going if you find some common shared values or shared experiences. And that is the sweet spot. And the moment you find the common values between a brand and the consumers, you have got the pulse that, way to actually hit. Second is to really connect with people. You need to look at the behavior of people and then why they are behaving in certain way. So the cultural context in which people actually act is completely different from one, say about, your division to another division, one country to another country. Because that cultural texture and then the culture, which is what actually connects you to them. Common shared values and having a deeper insight into human behavior, and then what can you actually do to change that behavior, alter or use that behavior to really connect with people. So that is where the entire good communication will always lie. Because if there is no human connect, there is no empathy. If there is no empathy, there is no loyalty. If there is no loyalty, you are cutting your own legs. There is no profitability. So everything is on that. Why do we need to have this empathy? If you go to a hotel, and then if the flower pot was put bang in the center of the room and then you trip and fall, you will never excuse those guys, do you? But if you were to go to a hotel where you stay 3 days a week, and if this were to happen, you forgive them because you have some empathy, some relationship with them. So that is the reason why brands today don't talk about product features, because all of them are replicable. What is not replicable is the emotional attachment which the bond which you share with people. That's very, very important, whether you are doing for a brand or whether you are doing for your own personal life. You need to find insights, you need to connect with people, and then that is far more important. And that is what is missing in most of the work which people do. And then all successful brands or successful leaders or anyone who is successful, they have the knack of connecting with people. Look at Mahatma Gandhi, look at anyone. They have an insight into what people want. Mahatma Gandhi had the greatest insight that Indians are lazy, they do nothing. So he said, Satyagraha, do nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to understand that we are not just physical beings, but we are emotional beings.
Yeah.
And if we are emotional beings, the other thing I believe that all of us need to also appreciate that since we are emotional beings, we are different. And if we are different, every single one of us should be able to contribute something different. Yeah, so we are capable of putting in, all of us are capable of bringing in some sort of innovation. Do you think that's true?
Yes. What I'd like to say as well is, I think, everybody wants to see something which is authentic. So authenticity is important regardless of where you're from, right? The brands that work, the advertising campaigns that work have to be authentic. However, I think the challenge is the level of tolerance of consumers or communities to establish what is authentic and what isn't. So when I looked at some of the very interesting adverts this morning from Coca-Cola and from Amazon, my feelings were coming from the West. Those adverts wouldn't work in the West because whilst they are authentic, they are projecting a perfect existence. And so in the West, people are very cynical about and how they judge authenticity. So we like failure and destruction and imperfection. So whilst still in Asia, you will see the perfect family and respect for their elders and all these sorts of things. In the West, you see more, an authentic campaign is seeing a couple who, there was one telecoms campaign where there was a couple who were married and then afterwards they got divorced and they're having to manage childcare issues and stuff like that. Things that would kind of be a taboo in Asia, right? This idea that people don't get on or you're admitting your mistakes. And we can see, therefore, that this kind of evangelism that is still present in Asia isn't working in the West, and it doesn't work even for Asians that live in the West because they start to think in that way too. So we have to be very sensitive to this idea of how we connect and communicate in an authentic way. And unfortunately, what that might mean is in certain cultures, you have to be a lot more honest and pragmatic and sophisticated and less evangelical, less political, and tone things down. So a soft drink maybe can't change the world because the Pepsi campaign that happened in the States lasted 24 hours that tried to suggest something greater than it could actually achieve. So I think the interesting thing for me then is how do you manage these communications campaigns across these geographies and cultures where people are trying to look for cracks, and when they're looking for cracks, they're looking to establish how real or true or authentic is this thing. And that becomes a challenge for brands too, because do you want to admit, sure, my drink's going to rot your teeth, but don't drink it too often. You know? I mean, but that could be actually an honest representation. Actually, I met the owner of, there was a Muslim brand that came out, Meghna Cola, right? Still exists. And I met the brother a couple of years ago. I hope he doesn't mind because it's being videoed. But I said to him, how often do you drink your cola? And he says, I don't drink it. I said, well, why the hell should I drink it then?
Simple question, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't drink your cola, absolutely. I'm not going to. Do your grandchildren? He's like, well, no. I said, well, why the hell should my kids? You know, and so I think that actually in the West, people are being a lot more open and honest and forward about asking those questions, and companies have to answer those questions. Like, what do you do with your profits? Like, what is your view on this campaign? And so there have been quite a few examples recently where, like Lego was one where people said stop advertising in British tabloid newspapers because they are transmitting ideas of hate and xenophobia and anti-immigration. So they said, okay, if you don't like our advertising in tabloids because we're giving them advertising revenue that then pays for these journalists to write hateful things, we stop advertising. So they responded to consumers, they issued an announcement on Twitter, and people are happy. And I think that eventually this will start to move to Asia because you've got larger populations, and when people get unhappy, they're really going to get unhappy. And social media is really influential in this part of the world. So my warning would be that quite soon, be careful of consumers. They're going to become more vocal, more discerning, and more demanding. So you better start getting honest sooner rather than later.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Before I end, I would like you to, give some advice to Sharif. Sharif was saying that Bangladesh Brand Forum is planning to open up sort of 10 different innovation centers across the country. The purpose is very simple, not just to help them think better, but also be able to contribute to their part of the society. Would you be willing to put in a couple of words for Sharif, give him some advice in terms of what he can do to ensure that these centers sort of run properly and profitably?
I think that, one of the things about localization is in every place, people have their own subcultures. They have their own dialects. They have their own way of living. So if you tap into those human resources are the biggest resources anybody can ever have. And then if you really look at what they're good at, in each one, all 10 children will not be the same, all 10 districts will not be the same. Some will have more resources, some will have lesser resources. But if you were to actually use them for their strength and then, make those hubs, not politically saying that, we need to have all steel factories everywhere spread around, but, just picking on the strengths of each one and then developing that would actually yield very good results.
Jonathan?
So very simply, because now we're running out of time, I would say if the forum could spend some of their time telling the rest of the world how great Bangladesh is. That's really important. So that foreigners and outsiders know that Bangladesh is a great place. It has to be said again and again and again. Bangladesh is great, Bangladesh is great, Bangladesh is great. And then eventually what happens is people will listen and they'll want to know, why is Bangladesh great? And then if foreigners outside of Bangladesh are saying Bangladesh is great, what happens? People in Bangladesh go, hey, we're great. I didn't kind of realize, but we are kind of good. And then it has a positive impact. It's the same in every country. Someone used to say to me, you can never be like sheikh in your own village, right? Because people see you going down your corner shop and whatever it is. People always have fonder memories of you outside of your home turf. So I think an important part of this is, in different languages, on different platforms, everybody in this room needs to be telling the world, foreigners, what is great about Bangladesh. That's really important.
Everything is, right? I'm sure. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being here in Bangladesh and helping us think better. Let's put our hands together for the two gentlemen. Thank you.